Hello, I'm Stephen Hayes. Welcome to the Marriage Challenge podcast, brought to you by Care for the Family. In this episode, we are joined by Steve and Chris Hughes, who are going to talk about a topic that will resonate with many couples: the need for good communication and what to do when you have a very different style of communication to your spouse. But first, let me introduce them. Steve and Chris have been married for 35 years and have 3 grown-up daughters. Steve works in IT and is currently writing a book on marriage. Chris is an associate pastor, and together they support other married couples. So, Chris and Steve, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So, just to get us started, how did you meet and then end up getting married?
We actually met through my mum, which was an interesting start. We met in church. Mm-hmm. My mother's Catholic and took me along. And it just so happened Steve was playing in the band, and so she spoke to him and decided that she needed to introduce him to me. So what did she say, Steve?
Well, she said, "I've got a daughter you really ought to meet," and my heart just sank. Because that usually means that they're trying to marry said daughter off. So I would claim that I've actually got an arranged marriage. Because that was indeed the case, and Chris was having none of it. If her mum was introducing her to a young man, then I was like 2-0 down when I started. But it was great. We just kept bumping into each other at different events, and at a party, I remember just talking to Chris the entire night and then offering to give her a lift home. And it went from there, and we ended up getting married.
Wonderful. So, looking now to our topic for today, the importance of communication. Can you tell a little bit about when you first realised that communication was going to be something that you needed to work on in your relationship?
Yeah, I think probably we'd only been married about a month when Steve decided that it'd be really good to have a chat to see how we were doing. And so he said, "So Chris, I want you to tell me 3 things about me that you're not happy with." And I have never communicated in that way before, so I went completely blank. I couldn't think of anything. It wasn't the form of communication I was at all used to, because my background was of a family where we didn't discuss issues at all. Parents didn't row, but nothing was discussed. So I did not know how to handle this. So Steve decided to help me. So he said, "Okay, Chris, that's fine. I will start and I will give you 3 things that irritate me about you," which simply made me feel a total failure and shut me down even more. And it was a disaster.
Oh, my. How about for you?
Well, I realised that my approach wasn't very good. And what happened was we started to look at our family backgrounds, because when you come into marriage, you bring stuff with you, seen and unseen. And my family, 1 sister, 2 parents, but around the meal table it would be quite robust conversation. We'd all be expected to express an opinion from an early age about different topics, you know, what the government was doing, how London was changing with different populations moving in, and just how we would do life. And I realised that I was used to thinking on my feet and being quite direct, whereas Chris's family were different.
Mm-hmm. So, well, we agreed that we would find the communication that would work for both of us. And that meant for both of us we had to change the communication styles that we'd known all our lives. And that's been a really difficult and painful journey for me, particularly because it's meant I've needed to learn to connect to my emotions. I've needed to understand how I feel, and I've needed to learn to have the courage and the confidence to recognise this could bring confrontation. And I've never had to deal with confrontation because we didn't in my background. So for me, I had to make the choice to go through a pain barrier, or several pain barriers, over a number of years.
And it was more a case of just coaxing Chris out, of seeing what was in Chris that she couldn't express, and for me learning to be kind and learning to be gentle, and not assuming that I was right. So that was a bit of a change.
And you had to learn to give me space.
Yeah, space is quite important.
Yeah. So Steve might ask me something and I would just blank, and rather than pushing me, he had to recognise to give me space to go away and process and think and work out how I felt and how I wanted to word it and phrase it.
Mm. It's really interesting that you both had brought different things into the marriage from your experiences. So how did you learn to work through those differences?
I think we were given good advice, and the advice was to set time aside and just to make sure that you do talk. Because some people walk away if they're feeling grumpy or if they've got something difficult to say. And so we made sure that we put time aside. Not having a telly in the first year of marriage, I think, was brilliant, because it meant that we spent more time talking to one another. Mm. And I'd grown up in a family that used to argue a lot, and then they would get quite wounded and go away and sulk for a while and then come back. And I found I really liked that feeling of not having an atmosphere. So we just worked at keeping a good atmosphere. Yeah,
I think it's almost like calling it the space between us. And I think we need to keep the space between us clear. And when we're harbouring resentment, when there's bad feelings, when there's unspoken stuff, you get this sort of atmosphere between us. And so we've made a commitment that we will not let that fester. We will sort it.
So what is communication like now? Do you feel like you've mastered it, or is there still things you're working through?
Oh, we're still working through. So even trying to prepare this, we were sort of sitting down and chatting what we're going to talk about, and we were clashing. And we had to sit down and think, well, let's just stop here. We've just got very different styles. We're very different people. So all the time we're having to recognise this isn't working.
I think it's also how you feel on the day, because you can end up feeling, you can have a good day or you can have a bad day. You can be feeling tired. You've just taken an awkward phone call, or everything might be fantastic in your world. And you start from that place when you're trying to have a chat. And sometimes you don't know when a big topic is going to crop up. You think it's going to be an easy conversation about the shopping, and then suddenly you end up having a totally different idea. So it catches you unawares. So you still have to work through those things throughout your married life. You never put them to one side.
Clearly there are still things that you have to work on. Do you have a set way of dealing with that, or is it just making time?
I think the biggest thing we've worked at is learning to listen to each other. And it's so easy to do what we call shoot, reload, you know, and whilst one person's saying what they think, the other person is only half listening because they're already thinking of the answer that they want to give back. And so we have worked very hard at just learning to listen to the other person and just hear. So often we say words, but actually we're not really expressing our feelings. We're not really expressing why. I mean, it takes us a while to work out what's actually happening inside of us. So it's better to just listen and let that person talk and express and not react, and try and get to the root of actually what is going on here.
I think for me, it's learning to also pick the right time. So early on, we found that when we had young children, that talking about things that had cropped up during the day within 10 minutes of me getting home from work was not good timing, because I still had my head in the workplace and I needed a cup of tea and to unwind a bit. And I think it's reflecting back. So I'll say, so what you're saying is this, and explaining it. And rather than criticise Chris, I might say, when you do a particular thing, this is how it makes me feel.
Yeah, we work really hard to not criticise each other and just to be kind. So yeah, we try to be kind, we try to be honouring in our communication, but we're not always, you know, none of us are perfect and we get it wrong. But I think it's being willing to acknowledge that and say sorry and just keep trying.
Really helpful advice. Steve and Chris, thank you so much for being open with us and what you've shared. Before we finish, in every episode, we ask our guest couple to give us a marriage challenge. Something practical that couples listening can try out in the coming weeks. what could you recommend?
We have created communication moments. So important to us is breakfasting and meals together. Because if you never have planned moments where you sit down and you turn the communication devices off, then you're never going to connect. So creating those moments works quite well for us. And we've kept it up throughout married life. Even when the kids were tiny, we would always start the day, unless I was travelling, to have breakfast together. That was quite important.
Well, it definitely sounds like something our listeners will want to try at home. Well, that's all for this episode. It just leaves me to say thank you, Steve and Chris, for joining us. And we look forward to tackling another marriage challenge next time. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
You have been listening to the Marriage Challenge podcast. For further information about our courses, resources and events, visit us at www.careforthefamily.org.uk.